Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Since Tuesday of this week I did a review of The Colony by Audrey McGee, which I just finished, and I thought in time for the Booker Prize shortlist reaction. I thought I'd do the review and put the video out on Tuesday, jinxing The Colony and making sure it did not make the Booker Prize shortlist. So in honor of that, I thought today, carrying on my week of destruction and jinxing, I would do a really quick deep dive on a really short book. And that book is Small Things Like These by Keegan. Now, I read this back in April, I believe, and I reread it again yesterday after the shortlist announcement. And there are 5 things about this book that I think are underappreciated. I know that a lot of people, when they read that book, they thought it was just kind of a sort of a heartwarming, charming, Christmassy kind of story. And, you know, without making too big a deal of it, I think there are things that people might be missing about this. A real quick synopsis of Small Things Like These. Small Things Like These involves a story that revolves around a character named William Furlong, who runs a business in the small Irish town of New Ross, sometime I think in the mid 1980s. His business is essentially like a colliery. He sells coal and wood and things like that for people to heat their homes, etc. And he discovers the existence of a Magdalen laundry in his community. Magdalen laundries existed in Ireland for a long time. There were places where people more or less disposed of unwed mothers, or their children were taken from them and they were kind of forced into servitude in these laundries run at monasteries by Magdalen nuns. So the number one thing I think is great about this book is the writing. That would be my number one point to make about this book, and to kind of prove that, I'm just going to read the opening paragraph. By the way, in a book that's only 116 pages, you kind of have to be careful not to read too much because there's not that many words to begin with. But anyway, here's the very opening paragraph of Small Things Like These. In October, there were yellow trees. Then the clocks went back the hour, and the long November winds came in and blew and stripped the trees bare. In the town of New Ross, chimneys threw out smoke, which fell away and drifted off in hairy, drawn-out strings before dispersing along the quays, and soon the river Barrow, dark as stout, swelled up with rain. So, to me, that's just beautiful writing. And, you know, one of the great things about Small Things Like These is the beautiful writing and Keegan's ability to kind of capture things in very short descriptions and in very few words. So the second thing I think is great about Small Things Like These is the symbolism that exists in the book, in the description. And, you know, in a book this short, you don't have time to be too subtle, so some of that symbolism may have struck you as kind of heavy-handed, but in particular, I thought the presence of crows in the book and their relationship then to the people in the book who are viewed as the ones who are in the wrong, who are viewed kind of as being the bad guys in the book. I thought that was really well handled too. So I'll read you another paragraph. Again, there's a danger in this. So this is the paragraph that begins chapter 4. It was a December of crows. People had never seen the likes of them, gathering in black batches on the outskirts of town, then coming in, walking the streets, cocking their heads and perching impudently on whatever lookout post that took their fancy, scavenging for what was dead, or diving in mischief for anything that looked edible along the roads, before roosting at night in the huge old trees around the convent. So notice that the crows here are scavenging. There are lots of them. They're clearly, you know, something that people are noticing, paying attention to. They are not portrayed as being in a positive light. And the last words there is that they were around the convent, which lets you know that the crows kind of are also symbolizing the people in the convent as well. So I thought that was good. Also, I think that the descriptions of the river oftentimes carry some symbolic weight as well, but I won't go into too much of that. So point number 3 about this book is that it is a very anti-religious, particularly very anti-Catholic book. It is brutal in its depiction of monastery, in its depiction of the nuns, in its depiction of the kind of false piety of the citizens of the town, in its depiction of, you know, the priest and his homily, and, you know, all these things are depicted really negatively, as something that people just go through the motions of, that don't necessarily have any meaning, that don't have any real impact. The idea that despite the different orders, the Magdalene nuns who run the laundry are not necessarily affiliated with the same nuns and religious organization which runs the local school, but despite that, the idea that they're all in it together, that they're all part of the same group, I think is really an undercurrent of this book, a theme in this book that oftentimes I think gets overlooked because of people's belief that it is kind of a warm, Christmas type book, which I don't believe it is. So the fourth thing about this book, which I think goes underappreciated, is how remarkable the character of William Furlong is. William Furlong is a man, and he is definitely kind of the protagonist of this book. He is the focus of the story. The story goes where he goes, and there's no story where he's not. And yet, this is very much a book about women. It's very much a book in which women feature in really important ways. And Furlong is a character who appreciates, who admires, who relies on, depends on, and is aware of his dependence on women. This comes up over and over again. Not to give away too many spoilers, but the circumstances of Furlong's birth and his childhood made him completely dependent on his mother. He and his mother were more or less saved by a benefactress who he came to treat almost as a grandmother. His wife is practical. She is hardworking. She's a good mother to her daughter. She takes care of things that need to be taken care of. And she, puts her family first above everything else. And Furlong knows he can rely on her. He has 5 daughters. His oldest daughter works at his place of business when he can't be there. And he can rely on her. He loves his family. When another character in the book says, it's a shame you never had a son, he doesn't see that at all. He doesn't have that feeling. When he needs help, he go to defrost an icy lock. He goes across the street from his business where a very attractive woman loans him a kettle, which he uses to kind of defrost the lock, and then she invites him in for tea. And even though he has looked at her admiringly, he does not go in. He goes on about his business. And Mrs. Kehoe, who can be seen as a not particularly positive character in the book, clearly has Furlong's best interest at heart when she cautions him against doing something about the Magdalene laundry. She clearly has his best interest at heart, and she is there to remind him of all the things that would be at risk if he takes action. And these are women he relies on, women who help him, women that he admires, women who he depends on, women he knows he can trust. And the only women in the book who aren't depicted that way are the nuns. The nuns aren't depicted that way, nor are the inmates of the Magdalene laundry depicted that way. One as kind of predators, and the other as potentially victims. But the other thing I wanted to point out about this book is it's not really hopeful. It's not a warm, fuzzy Christmas story. I know a lot of other people have pointed this out, but there is a direct mention in Small Things Like These of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Furlong gets the book when he's a child and reads it, and clearly Keegan is attempting to kind of draw some kind of connection between Small Things Like These and Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but it's not the same connection. In A Christmas Carol, when Scrooge turns over a new leaf after meeting, the 3 ghosts, when he turns over a new leaf and he becomes a good person, he's risking nothing. He's a wealthy man, and he's essentially going to use his wealth to help people, but he's not at any risk. Furlong is at risk. What Furlong does in this book, the action that he takes, puts him at risk, it puts his family at risk, it puts his finances at risk, it puts his business at risk, it puts his standing in the community at risk. He is taking a risk to do what he believes is the right thing. And while, we might admire him for that, I think Keegan does more than a little bit to suggest that he's taking this risk also for his wife and for his daughters. And he is relying on his faith in them and their strength as a family to be able to overcome all the challenges his action takes. And in lots of ways, I think his admiration for them and his faith in their strength is what allows him to take that action. But this is not a warm, fuzzy Christmas Carol story. There's no happy ending here. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen to Furlong's business or his daughter's school or even his marriage. We don't know that. And so to me, it is not this kind of happy story, this fuzzy Christmas story. To me, is a story about a person deciding to take action at great personal risk to themselves without knowing exactly what the outcome is going to be.